Will these psionic subclasses blow your mind? This week we take an in-depth look at the first 3 Unearthed Arcana subclasses and decide if they're a mystic or just a mistake. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese, and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that the new Young Adventurer's Guide book, Wizards and Spells, is now available. You can pick that up at any online distributor, including our website, to which I will put the link in the description. It is an awesome book full of awesome art, and it will help any of the young people in your lives get into Dungeons and Dragons. And as always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. The channel has seen some amazing growth in the past few weeks, and it is all thanks to your support. So thank you to everyone who has already done all of those things. You're awesome. But enough of all of that, let's get to this Unearthed Arcana business. Anyone who pays attention to this stuff has noticed that Wizards of the Coast has been releasing Unearthed Arcana at an extremely rapid pace these past few months, which means they are definitely gearing up for another book release, and that book release will definitely contain a fair amount of playable content. The reason I say that is because the last 3 UA releases have been purely subclasses and related spells and features. My friends have been bugging out about all these subclasses, so I figured it was time to take a closer look, and what better justification than to make a YouTube video about it. So this first UA made me a little nervous because as soon as I opened up the page, I see this, the Psychic Warrior, Psionics. If you have watched my previous videos, you know that I have some pretty mixed feelings about Psionics and 5e to say the least. On one hand, I love the idea of a psychic caster who uses their mind to manipulate the battlefield and their opponents. On the other hand, there are no rules dictating how Psionics might work in 5e, so adding them in could imply adding new mechanics to a system made popular by its simplicity. So before I get too far into my feelings about the subclasses, let's go ahead and take a look at their features and discuss the balance. Now keep in mind, for those unfamiliar with UA, this is all playtest material. These are by no means the finished product, so any negative feelings I have about them may end up being completely meaningless when they actually release. So while I will discuss the balance of each one, because I just feel like I kind of have to, the main purpose of this video is to get a good idea of where Wizards is heading with this rather contentious field of magic. So let's start first with the fighter archetype, the Psychic Warrior. The first feature of the Psychic Warrior is called Psionic Armament. At the beginning of each day, you can choose between one of 2 abilities. Either you can use your reaction to reduce damage by a d10, increasing to a d12 at 10th level, or you can add 1d4, increasing to 1d6 psychic damage to 1 attack per turn. Whichever ability you choose, you can use it all day until you finish a long rest, at which point you can make that choice again. I think this is a pretty cool feature. It opens up the option of either adding to your ability to tank damage or your ability to deal damage, so it leaves it pretty flexible based on your party composition. You also gain the ability to cast Mage Hand without components, and it's invisible. This comes up a lot in this video because I guess all Psionics can cast invisible Mage Hand at will. I guess it makes sense because you're just kind of moving stuff around with your mind. The next feature you get at 7th level is called Strength of Mind. You can use a bonus action to deal 2d6 damage to a creature within 20 feet and move them up to 15 feet either away or towards you. They have to succeed on a strength save, but the problem is that the DC is calculated with your intelligence, so this archetype kind of falls into the same trap as Eldritch Knight, where you're encouraged almost to spread your stats super thin, or alternatively focus on not so efficient stats instead. Don't get me wrong, I love the ability, but you only get so many high stats, so very rarely will this ability end up doing anything. That said, you can do it a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier, so I guess if you do end up putting a decent roll into intelligence, then it wouldn't be too terrible. Next up is Telekinetic Bulwark at 10th level. This feature allows you to sacrifice an attack to project a 10-foot psychic barrier centered on yourself, which provides all allies within range half cover and advantage on strength saving throws. The barrier lasts for 1 minute and can only be used once between long rests or after you've used your second wind ability. I like this feature a lot. If there's one resource fighters can bear to spend, it is their attacks. It offers protection for you and your party, and it has a fun little recharge interaction with Second Wind, which I think is a fun, small way to buff the fighter class without really changing anything core about the class itself. Your 15th level ability is called Agonizing Strike. You can also use this one a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier. Again, a lot of that in this video too. Anyway, Agonizing Strikes allows you to add an additional 2d10 psychic damage to one of your attacks and force them to make a Constitution saving throw or be knocked prone and have disadvantage on all ability checks until the end of your next turn. Now this one I really like. Despite it still being calculated by your intelligence modifier, there is absolutely no risk to just tossing it onto one of your attacks, because regardless of what happens, it deals an additional 2d10 psychic damage. It has potential for extra utility, but a guarantee for extra damage. And lastly, the 18th level ability of this archetype is called Psychic Dreadnought. When you take damage, you can use your reaction to basically turn into a psychic tank for 1 minute. Every round, you regain 10 HP, your walking speed increases by 10 feet, and standing up from prone requires only 5 feet of movement. I was kind of underwhelmed with this one, to be honest. Anyone who has played a high-level campaign knows that 10 damage per round is next to nothing at 18th level. Not to mention the effect ends if you're incapacitated, so it doesn't even serve to bring you back up from unconsciousness. I think I'd like to see some sort of damage resistance, or maybe just a numbers tweak here to make it more appropriate for a super late-game fighter. Overall, I think I enjoy this archetype. I very much enjoy the direction it is going as a more protective, utility-based tanky fighter. None of it seems particularly overpowered. In fact, I think a couple features could use a bit of a buff, namely the capstone feature. With a couple numbers tuned up here or there, I definitely enjoy seeing this in one of my campaigns, and have already begun theory crafting some multi-class options which may make it much stronger than the base class. Next up, we have the Soul Knife, a psionic rogue archetype. First of all, love the name. I'm not entirely sure it makes sense with psionic abilities since you're using brain powers and not soul powers, but brain knife doesn't really have the same ring. Either way, this archetype is a doozy. Upon choosing Soul Knife at 3rd level, you gain your Psychic Blade. As a bonus action, you can essentially create a dagger in one or both hands that is just better than a normal dagger in literally every way. Not only does it have a higher normal range with 30 opposed to the base dagger's 20, it also deals a d6 rather than a d4. Plus, being able to make it as a bonus action essentially just means you have infinite daggers. Also, at 3rd level, you get Psionic Enhancement, which is another feature that allows you to choose an ability at the end of a long rest. This one allows you to choose between the ability to communicate telepathically with any creature within 30 feet, a 5-foot move speed increase, or a max and current HP increase equal to your intelligence modifier plus your rogue level. All of those are pretty great, so really no downside to that. I'd say definitely a combat advantage to the temp HP, but it's all good. At 9th level, you get the Terrifying Blade feature. Anytime you hit a creature with one of your psychic blades, you can force them to make a wisdom save or be frightened of you until the start of your next turn. If they succeed, they're immune to this effect for 24 hours. This one is actually pretty strong because you can do it as many times as the creatures fail. You don't have to expend any resources to do it either, so basically anytime you hit a creature with your weapon, there's a chance they're just going to be afraid of you. That helps a lot when you're a squishy little rogue and don't want to get slapped around too much. This is one I'd actually probably limit to a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier, much like the other features in this document. From a GM perspective, having to roll a save against fear every single time your rogue makes an attack is just obnoxious. And there really aren't any other mechanics in the game like that. It feels to me that this feature is kind of just lacking in consistency with the rest of the archetypes in this document that limit the number of uses in the very same way. The 13th level feature is called Psychic Veil, which basically allows you to cast invisibility on yourself without maintaining concentration a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier. This isn't bad because invisibility on a rogue is never bad, but does feel a little meh to me since the Arcane Trickster can just learn the spell Invisibility at 7th level, 6 levels before this one. Again, not bad, just feels a little weak when compared to other archetypes. And lastly, at 17th level, the Soul Knife gets Rend Mind. This one hurts. You can expend one of your psychic blades to force a target to make an intelligence save or take 12d6 psychic damage and be stunned until the start of your next turn. Ouch. Now granted, 12d6 at 17th level isn't anything insane considering a rogue's sneak attack is 96 at that point, but a normal attack can't stun, so this is strong. The only downside is that the stun ends at the start of your next turn, so once you use this ability, you can't actually benefit from the stun yourself. And once again, you can do this a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier. I like this archetype a lot. I love the psychological warfare aspect of this rogue. It feels unique from the other rogue archetypes while also not feeling too much weaker or stronger. I personally think they could take a bit of power off the Psychic Blade and figure out how to add a small amount of power elsewhere in the archetype, but otherwise this one doesn't feel too imbalanced. And the final archetype in this UA is a wizard archetype. They just had to do it. Wizards of the Coast is just going to keep throwing the psionic dart at the mystic dartboard until they hit a bullseye. They just really want this mystic business to happen. But in all seriousness, I really do want a psionic full caster, and I think the best way to do it is to make it into an archetype, but I am not entirely sure they quite hit the mark with this one yet. Let's take a look at it. So, to begin with, at second level, you get a psionic focus, which is essentially just a spellcasting focus that also allows you to reroll ones on any spells that deal psychic or force damage, but you have to use the second roll. That's cool. Increasing the minimum damage of a specific type of spell is a pretty reliable way to make it better without it potentially becoming insanely strong. And thematically, it makes sense that a psionic caster would be a little bit better at dealing psychic and force damage. Also, at second level, you get psionic devotion. You can choose either the Friends, Message, or Mage Hand cantrip and learn it. Whichever one you choose, it gets a special little bonus. Choosing Friends makes it to where when the spell ends, the target doesn't become hostile to you. Message no longer requires verbal or somatic components, and Mage Hand becomes invisible and requires a bonus action. All pretty cool, nothing too crazy. I liked where this one was going at first. And then we got to Thought Form. At 6th level, you can gain the ability to use a bonus action to transform into pure psionic energy for 10 minutes. While in thought form, all of your spells are cast psionically, which means they do not require verbal, somatic, or material components that lack a gold to cast. In addition, you also gain resistance to psychic damage, as well as bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. And you can assume thought form a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier. That is insane. It feels like a freaking paladin capstone, but at 6th level. Where do I start? First of all, being able to assume this form as a bonus action, pretty strong. I'm willing to accept that bit though, because wizards don't really get any bonus actions, but the benefits they get from this form are better than some barbarians get from rage. Being able to cast spells psionically means they can't be countered because there's no visual or audio cue that you're casting the spell. Tack that on to gaining resistance to psychic damage and non-magical physical damage, and being able to do that up to 5 times a day. Whew, this feature is crazy. I think the easiest fix would be to make this something you can do once a day, or at most once between a short or long rest. That would at least keep you from being able to do it reliably every single combat. However, you'll see in a moment why I don't think that's really a reasonable fix, because it kind of seems like they wanted thought form to be the centerpiece of the archetype. Which leads me to think a better fix would be to reduce the benefits of this form. Uncounterable spells? I'm fine with that. I think that is a fun and unique mechanic we haven't really played with beyond Subtle Spell, but all that other stuff seems a little goofy. Wizards are supposed to be squishy. I do not like removing any risk from this already intensely powerful class. So to me, the most logical fix to this would be just removing the resistance to physical damage, but keep the resistance to psychic damage and the psionic spellcasting bit. This allows you to use this form pretty much whenever you want without making your DM want to rip their hair out. Moving on now to Mental Discipline, the 10th level feature. This is another strong one. You choose between Dominate Person, Telekinesis, or Scrying, and add the chosen spell to your spellbook. Whichever one you choose, you can always cast it without any components. Additionally, you can cast that spell once per day without even expending a spell slot. Wow, okay, so here we go again. Free spells are awesome, but the one thing wizards absolutely do not have trouble with is spell selection. Giving them these spells, all very powerful in their own right, and then allowing them to cast it for free once a day and always without components is crazy. I'm not sure what to do with this feature, but it just feels like they're beating a dead horse by giving the wizard additional spell power, but like the opposite of beating a dead horse, so more like giving steroids to Secretariat. Oh, and that's not even the only thing this archetype gets at 10th level. You also gain the ability to add your intelligence modifier to the damage of any spell that deals force or psychic damage. So, as if mental discipline wasn't enough, now you can add your intelligence modifier to the damage of spells you're already re-rolling ones on. So now the damage floor and ceiling have both been raised. And the last feature you get at 14th level is called Thought Travel. While in thought form, you gain a fly speed equal to your walking speed and can hover. Surprisingly, totally fine. Nothing crazy here, just a flying manifestation of psychic powers. Nothing unusual at this level, I guess. I really want to like this archetype, and I think I would like it a lot more with a bit of balancing. Again, I do like the direction it's going, but it just gets too much right now. I love the idea of a wizard who has mastered the ability to cast spells straight from the brain, ignoring the old ideas of verbal, somatic, and material components. But that mechanic in and of itself adds additional power to the class by removing the possibility of counterspell. So they really don't need to add too much more power to the archetype beyond that, in my opinion. And finally, they added some spell spells and 2 feats to choose from as well. There isn't too much to say about the spells, which I think is a good thing. They all use mechanics which already exist in some form in 5e, but are definitely new and unique spells. They're largely aimed at disruption and protection in ways we haven't really seen spells touch yet. There are spells that allow you to use a reaction to allow another creature to reroll saves, spells that knock back enemy creatures, gives you advantage on certain saves, stuff like that. It's all pretty cool and well balanced from what I can tell, while staying perfectly loyal to 5e's current system of spells. The 2 feats are called Telekinetic and Telepathic. Telekinetic essentially gives you that mage hand that the wizard and fighter both get. It's invisible and you can use it as a bonus action, but you can also make a shove attack with it using your intelligence as the modifier, which I think is super duper fun. Telepathic gives you proficiency in deception, insight, intimidation, or persuasion, as well as allowing you to communicate telepathically with any creature within 30 feet. And they can respond as well. Pretty cool feats. They don't change too much about the game, but they add some fun new mechanics that aren't otherwise offered. And that's pretty much everything that was in the UA, so here are my final thoughts. Overall, I'm actually quite pleased. I think Wizards has found a direction to follow with Psionics that stays much more loyal to 5e than their earlier attempts at the Mystic years back. Other than a couple balance issues here and there, nothing really stood out to me as game-breaking, and the closest thing to a new mechanic is the Psionic spellcasting of the Wizard. They do a good job of setting apart Psionics as a more support-oriented spellcasting school, whereas the Mystic, they kind of just let Psionics do everything better than every other school of magic. Creating a bunch of Psionic subclasses opens the door to this new type of magic without overwhelming the game with a slew of new ideas and game-breaking abilities, so I'm really happy with the direction they chose. With just a little bit more balancing, I think these subclasses will be an awesome addition to whatever book they find their way into, and I sincerely hope we get to see the finished versions soon. But that's all for me. Let me know in the comments what you think about this playtest content, and if you think you'll ever allow this kind of stuff at your table. Next week, I'll be taking a look at the next Unearthed Arcana containing new subclasses for the Bard, Cleric, and Sorcerer, 3 of my favorite classes, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. But until then, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you around.